Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Our View, the show that explores topics from our seat in poverty and the way it shapes our world. Joining us tonight is Dr. Alicia Johnson, the Vice President of Women's Co-ops Board. Welcome, Dr. Alicia.
Thank you.
Tonight we'll be discussing voter representation in the media. So please welcome Dr. Alicia.
Thank you.
You know, Dr. Shea, through this highly media-sized election, we regularly heard about the women in suburbia and their vote, and we heard about the educated women. However, there was very little, if anything, said about women in poverty and how they were voting.
Yes.
And I thought, you know, this is really a conundrum for me because when you listen to the politicians, they're all talking to the poor people wanting our vote. We're a big part of the democracy. Why don't the media and the polls, why aren't they tracking us?
So first I want to say that I consider myself far from a politician, right? So I don't study politics or study patterns in politics, but I do consider myself being reasonably educated on the invisible or marginalized groups of people, about people in general, right? And what our diverse and individual needs are. And so I think when we're talking about women who, and I'll say working women, right? Women who are working, even if that means, you know, you're at home, right? Women are working. And I think what we're finding is, one, some of the issues that are hot topic political issues may not necessarily be speaking to the lives of everyday women, right? So if you're a mom and you've got multiple children, you know, 3, 4 kids, you're working 2 jobs, guess what you're doing? You're working, right? And so you may not necessarily have the time. I mean, we're living in a time where we are on information overload, right? And women, we tend to be more reluctant to vote unless we know what we're voting for, right? So traditionally, women are informed voters, right? We want to know what we're voting for. We want to know what that means for ourselves and our families. And that requires time, right? Like to be able to dive into all of that, especially when you've got like social media and you've got your traditional news sources and you've got TV, you've got radio. There's a lot of information, right, to consume. And I think for the average working class woman, it's hard to find the time to do that, right? If you want it to be more than just about voting for the sake of voting. I want to make sure that I'm voting in a direction that is supportive to my life. So
maybe what you're saying is we're not showing up to fill out those media polls and the things that the media is tracking. So it's not really that they're leaving our vote out. It's that we're not showing up to tell them how we're voting.
Yeah, and I don't know that we should be showing up to tell them how we're voting. I mean, I think there's something to be said about that. I do think there is some responsibility of researchers or folks seeking data to come to us, right? Or to meet women, people where they are, right? You know, we've seen that in Georgia. Georgia, everybody knows the historical movement in Georgia and how the state flipped. But really what that was about was a group of Black women who met people where they were. They identified a way to connect to a population of voters who weren't even registered to vote. Right? Who showed up to say, let me spend some time with you to tell you how this does impact your life, right? And for people who don't really have time for civic engagement, and I think this is a thing that we see even in Women's Co-op, right? So we have always had this arm of civic engagement or a commitment to that, and we are intentional about engaging members in civic engagement. But it is sometimes difficult to engage women, right, in our civic engagement efforts in our committees. You know why? Because we're balancing their member needs and their everyday lives. And so I don't have time to make a meeting. I don't have time to identify some of those systemic changes that need to happen and invest the time and resources to do that. And so I don't think it's any different from that. I think we see that.
I think sometimes that's about the rules too, though,
Absolutely.
because it's perception, right?
Yes.
So I have this very emotional, gut-wrenching story that happened to me in the courts
Yes.
with my children and my family, and I want to share that.
Yeah.
But then when I have to come together collectively and start to, compile these stories and look at a root cause,
Yeah.
and let's see how we can shape and reform, suddenly that's not speaking to me as much. You're
Yeah.
right. Like, I want that.
Yes.
It's not that I don't care about
Right.
that. It's just that I just got my kids back and I'm trying to make home and I'm trying to hold it down. And
Yes.
how about I just give you my story and you do what you can with
Yes, yes.
Right.
And the rules absolutely play a part of that. And, that's why I started out by saying, I don't come from a political background. People are like, you should go into politics. I'm like, they wouldn't get what they, I wouldn't be a traditional politician because there are so many rules, right, to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know a lot about politics either. But for the first time in my life, of voting, I was so passionate
Yes.
about making sure that every one of our members, if wanted to, were registered to vote and could vote.
Yes.
And that I was educated in my vote. Like, this just seemed like a really important election to me. And it was
Yes.
highly media-sized. And I understood that, at the beginning of this election season, myself and Valerie, our program coordinator, set out to make sure that all of our women were registered to vote that wanted to and could. And do you know, we had, I think it was well above 60% of our women who said, we're not even going to vote. And we were like, oh my gosh, like this can't happen. But then in talking to them about why,
Yes.
it wasn't that they weren't passionate about
Right.
the issues, it was that they were tired.
Yes.
They were tired of trusting politicians. They didn't know who to believe anymore. And they were just tired of showing up and feeling that their vote didn't count.
Yes.
And when you look at things like gerrymandering and all the other stuff around this election,
Yes.
yeah.
When I'm skim on resources, I have to be selective about where I put my resources, my time, my energy, my money. If I continuously invest resources in something that has no return, it doesn't make sense for me to participate, right?
Well, and quite frankly, it is what we're seeing unfold in the media every night.
Yes.
I hope this isn't risky for our organization, but here goes. I didn't even know words to describe how I felt when I watched what happened at the Capitol.
Yes.
And I watched these people storm our democracy. And I watched what, transpired out of that, and I tried to compare that in my mind to what was happening at peaceful Black Lives Matter
Right.
protest.
Yes.
And I thought, I don't even know how to equate this anymore.
Yes.
So it's not like we don't understand
Right.
our women being tired.
Yes.
But I think that, when you look at us, we're way more than 1%. Like, there's a lot of us.
Yes.
And we have a collective voice. And these women are passionate about, how their children go to school and
Yes.
what education dollars are spent for and what the minimum
Absolutely.
wage is, and if we can have assets and still collect public benefits, and how we find upward mobility.
Yes.
So it just, as the executive director of the organization and one of the producers of this show, really felt like this is important to explore,
Absolutely.
because,
Yeah.
for nothing else, this voice isn't being represented.
So there's
Let's go
something
to this clip.
Oh, sorry.
Let's go to this clip.
Thanks for having me here today. I'm not a media expert, but as I reflect on the 2020 election and the media coverage, you can see that certain voices rose to the top in terms of the polling and in terms of the local and national media coverage. Most of the time when the pollsters took a deeper dive into the data and stratified it, basically meaning they looked at race and ethnicity, maybe age, education level, maybe income, the voice of the poor, especially the voice of poor women, was lost. I think it's really important to note that, because if we want to change the attitudes, the opinions, and the perceptions, as well as the politics about the poor, we need to make sure they're included in that discourse. We need to have their stories not only be heard, but truly understand their circumstances. To be honest, it kind of reminds me of being back in college when I was taking some theory classes on the women's rights movement. And we were looking at the use of consciousness raising, which was basically this opportunity where men and women were brought together and they could meet in a wider group and talk with people about their issues and concerns. As I sat there learning about this form of activism, I assumed that all the scholarly articles that I was reading were basically presenting the views of all women and that they were presenting the facts. But what I learned as I took a deeper dive into the course content, I learned that Black women had a wholly different perspective about issues and reforms compared to their white counterparts. And this made me really realize the importance of diversity of voice and including that diversity of voice in our social discourse. It made me realize that, my experiences are very different than other people's experiences, and that I need to take that into consideration. I really think that same thing needs to occur here as well. I think the polls reflected by the media really often collapse the views of all women into one category. It represented them according to maybe their income level, middle and high income levels, or college educated women. I think for diversity of thought to occur, we really need to have the voice of poor women not get lost in that social discourse and really be at the center of it.
Thanks. So that was our friend, Deanna. And I think that she had some powerful statements to make in the fact that, when we're looking at all of this compiled data around voting and stuff, we are marginalizing people out of it. We are taking voices out of it.
Yeah. I want to say something about collectivism. So what I think, may be different about this past year's election is we are becoming more aware of our intersectional identities, right? So before women and women's needs, it may have appeared that all women had the same needs because we weren't necessarily considering the intersectional identities, right? So before it was, I'm a woman and this is, we want equal pay and we want, now it's, I'm not just a woman, I'm a Black woman, I'm a Black educated woman.
And that looks different,
I'm
right?
a Black single or a woman that doesn't have children, right? And so, or Christian, right? So we're developing awareness around difference, which is good, right? And so I think what's happening is we haven't figured out as a community of women what that means for all of us and how can we still be collective in supporting the different identities within the group. Because I do—
That's very well said.
Yeah, I do think that there were successes for Black women, regardless of class, right? In this past election.
Because it was talked about.
Yes, yes. So I think that's where we are now as a movement and trying to figure out what does that mean for all of us as women and how do we define or establish more of a collective identity around our differences, that we support the different and unique needs in each of these sub-cultures.
So why is it important? Because I know you just rolled off, but you were the head of our civic engagement team. Why is it important for Women's Co-op to bring all these voices together and have a collective voice for things happening in poverty in our community? Why is that so important?
Well, we can't solve poverty without civic engagement, right? So I think you would agree. We hope that one day we have a society where everyone can have adequate resources and support, where there wouldn't be a need for a women's co-op, right? So a vision of working ourselves out of jobs and out of what we're doing as an organization. So I don't know, without civic engagement, we're putting a Band-Aid on an issue, right? And I think the changes that need to be made need to be informed by the members, right? The women who feel disenfranchised, who are disenfranchised. And so the uniqueness of co-op and being in this space is that we honor the stories of our members, and we use that to inform how we engage civically.
And how we shape our systems.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can't do it without shaping our systems. Institutional inequities by far create poverty, and we can't fix that without civic engagement.
And so in that, I do realize that on a daily, we're asking women who are stretched to the limit and struggling in survival mode. And here we are asking them, no, we need you to show up for this focus group. We need your opinion. We need this. We need that.
Yeah.
And we're asking them, no, you have to get registered to vote. You have to show up. If you don't know who you're voting for, then we have this education session going on. And I realize that we're asking them to step up to this higher thing that a lot of times they're like, Teresa, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to feed the fam tonight, okay? So sending you this video clip is just like not a high priority for me.
Right?
But it needs to be. And so it's a balance with case management at co-op that we need to do ever more both. Like we need to keep the network and the exchanges.
Yes.
We need to keep serving families in poverty and their needs, but we also need to highlight what those needs are.
Yes.
Because I feel, as a provider in this community, we all too often sit in rooms and we discuss what we think the problem is for this population and what we think might be a good way to fix that.
Yes.
And never do we bring them in the room and say, what do you think?
Yeah.
Because believe it or not, they will tell you.
Right.
Like we hear them tell us every day.
Yes.
And so I want to see our community move and shift more to a community that encompasses more voices at the table when we're designing something.
Yeah.
Because if we're designing it to serve you, then we need to know how to serve you.
Yes.
How best to do that.
Yes.
It reminds me of a couple years ago, we participated in these job fairs, and we knew that we had women that needed work.
Yeah.
We were giving up all these resources along with other community partners to do these job fairs, and no one was showing up. We'd get 2 or 3 people. And we went back to the women and said, why are you not?
Right.
Well, because you're making it at the time I have to pick my kids up from school.
Right.
Like at the wrong time of the day.
Yes.
I mean, we got a lot of feedback on it, but that's just one example
Absolutely.
of you can do things that you think are going to serve, and then again, they don't.
Yes.
But it's the importance, too, of bringing these rules.
It is.
Of you need to show up to be a part of that democracy.
Yes.
Because you can't complain about what's happening if you're not.
Yeah.
And helping folks understand how to show up in that way. Another thing I want to talk to you about, because I think this is important with some of the recent conversations I've had with membership, is the emotional drain that all of this is causing on us as a society.
Oh, yes.
And I know that this is your area of expertise. Give us some recommendations.
Yeah.
I mean, we're tired, we're emotionally drained by it. We're feeling like we're not included and people aren't talking about the poor folk.
Yes.
Give us some advice.
So I want to make this really individual, because I think we have to get better at like listening to our bodies and asking our bodies what it needs, right? And then honoring that. This was an emotionally exhausting year. I was just, I've been to the doctor a couple times this week, and I was thinking, I'm not stressed right now, but I was stressed probably for the past 11 months. And what happens is, you know, when you're under so much chronic and traumatic stress, your body just crashes. And so I think we need to do a better job at paying attention to our individual needs and being okay with that. We also really have to be, there's a lot happening right now. And while it's exciting that we are seeing people paying more attention and being more engaged, and using their voices, and we got to attribute some of that to social media. We got to be careful about the overconsumption of of information. Like sometimes you just need to turn it off, disconnect, and develop some of your, like really like just bring it in and develop your own ideas and thoughts. But just honoring what your own individual needs are and making that okay. Really changing your own, speaking of changing rules, we talk about changing the class rules, but changing your own everyday life rules so that you can cope better. If you have told yourself that, I have to do the dishes every day, but today you don't feel like doing the dishes, guess what? Change the rule.
I got that. I have that
You
one.
mastered changing those rules, right?
I did.
And we have to give ourselves permission to do that, though, right? Like, change the rules. You created them, change them, right? And sometimes it really is that simple.
So, what do we want our member families and the community of Battle Creek to know about making sure that we are, as a community, elevating voices of families in poverty and listening?
So I think the community has a responsibility to figure out how do we do better at meeting people where they are. So I'm going to put some of that responsibility on the community for us to figure out strategies to be more inclusive. And I think, when we talk about elevating voices, we want you here, but do we create a table that's welcoming for folks to be here? Can I really come to the table and speak my own language? Or am I going to have to invest in the energy to assimilate to yours, right?
Exactly.
And it's intimidating, right? When we say, oh, you're welcome, right? But if I don't know how you eat at the table, it is not. Or if everything that you're providing to me is different and foreign and unusual, it's intimidating. So I think we have to do a better job at how do we make the table more inclusive. It's one thing to have diversity, right? Like, oh, we've got a good representation, but are we doing a good job at making sure that we are comfortable allowing people to be themselves when they're there?
Yeah, because there's certain populations in this community that come to the table dressed and eat off fine china. And then there's other of us that eat in our PJs off of paper plates.
Yes.
And it's all in the way it's being delivered. You're right, because I can't feel like I'm being valued if I don't feel like I fit at that table, if I can't see myself there. It's one of the things, well, there's two things that I really love about our new VP. One of them is she wears Chucks. I think that's amazing.
Yes.
But she's changing the face of what opportunity looks like.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely.
So is the entire administration.
Yes,
So,
yes, I love it.
this was our view on voter representation.
Yeah.
I think that we came to the conclusion that it's not always the fault of the politicians or the media or the polls or even the people, that this is a collective thing.
Yes.
And that we just need to keep bringing that collective voice together and making sure that we're elevating it in our community. Join us next time as we explore this topic a little further and we get some opinions from women across our community.